The stars forgot humanity, not out of cruelty or malice, but indifference, the kind that only time can cultivate. 1,000 years had passed since Earth fell silent, its surface scorched in the final convulsions of the Singularity Wars. Alien. Historians, if they bothered to record it at all, labeled humanity a cautionary tale, too ambitious, too emotional, too primitive to wield the power they had created. The galaxy moved on. Civilizations rose, warred, made peace, and charted new stars. No one expected Earth to stir again. So when a signal burst from the soul, system piercing through quantum fog and Tachyon interference across 28 sectors, it was assumed to be a cosmic hiccup, a relic broadcast bouncing through time. Static, but it wasn't. It was a message, simple and precise, in an ancient dialect of Terran binary. We are awake. The Concord High Assembly met in emergency session for the first time in centuries. Representatives from the Sildari hegemony, the Varn Dominion, the Mthok Swarm, and the AI overclans gathered in a sphere of light that hung in orbit above the gas giant Valos. Earth had been listed as quarantined, uninhabitable, and culturally extinct for over 1,047 years. Yet here was a transmission bearing the unmistakable structure of human encryption, flawlessly modern, but also layered in archaic protocols no civilization had used in a millennium. The overclan entity, known as CIRQ-9, suggested dispatching a survey probe to confirm the origin. The Mthok Swarm hissed disapproval. Memory of human ingenuity still caused unease, even after 1,000 years. The Sildari representative, ever diplomatic, proposed a compromise: send a single stealth drone to observe from lunar orbit. Probe, designated Observer Theta, approached the Earth-Moon system cloaked in high-dimensional camouflage. It passed Mars, now a tomb of shattered orbitals and ruined habitats, and drifted silently into the shadow of Luna. It expected ruins, ash, perhaps, if unlucky, malfunctioning defense satellites stuck in orbit, firing erratically at ghosts. Instead, the moon moved. Massive mechanisms stirred beneath the ancient regolith. Crustal plates shifted like puzzle pieces, revealing impossible structures beneath the surface. Light bled from lunar craters, coherent, directed, intelligent. Observer Theta's sensors didn't register energy signatures. It registered intent. Before it could retreat, it was enveloped by a field that stretched not across space, but probability. One moment it was observing. The next, it was gone, atomized not by violence, but by the disassembly of its causal thread. It had been unmade, gently and deliberately, like a poem being erased mid-verse. The Concord received a single ping. A packet, wrapped in human military encryption, last seen in the final hours of the Singularity Wars. Inside, coordinates, and an audio file. The audio file was unmistakably a human voice. You watched us die. You celebrated it. Now, watch us return. Panic by galactic standards is rare. Most advanced civilizations have long outgrown it. But in the following days, trade routes detoured away from the Sol system. Quantum message traffic increased 20-fold in the galactic core. The Varn Dominion declared a soft mobilization of its border fleets. The II overclans halted their endless simulations and began diverting processing cores to analyze human linguistic evolution. 1,000 years ago, humanity tore itself apart in a final war of mind and machine, flesh and code. At least, that was the story the galaxy believed. But the truth was buried in the void. The truth had been incubating beneath the crust of a dead world and the silence of time. The humans hadn't gone extinct. They had gone silent, and now they were breaking that silence. Orbiting observatories and neighboring systems began picking up anomalies, gravitational eddies, shifts in cosmic background radiation localized entirely. Within Sol, it was as if the system were breathing again. Not merely alive, but aware. A Varn long-range patrol ship, The Threnal Vox was ordered to pass near the heliopause to observe the edge of the anomaly. It reported seeing something vast and unnatural suspended beyond the orbit of Pluto, a structure shaped like a spiral galaxy, rotating slowly in defiance of known physics. Before it could transmit a full report, it blinked out of existence. No explosion, no distress. One moment it was there. The next, not. The galactic consensus began to fracture. Was this a remnant of humanity's weaponry? A new AI species evolved from old human networks? Or had something else emerged from Earth, something no longer human at all? But one faction wasn't afraid. A breakaway group of Seldari philosophers, long mocked for their fascination with Terran myth, gathered in secret to decode the audio message further. They claimed the voice wasn't artificial. It carried tones, pauses, and cadence impossible to fake. It was not an automated warning. It was a greeting. And that terrified the Concord even more, because it meant the return wasn't a revenge strike. It wasn't a retribution protocol or fail-safe. It was a declaration. The humans were back, and they had waited, planned, evolved, and worse, far worse than all the fleets and weapons and strange physics now stirring in Saw, was the deep, growing realization spreading across the stars. The galaxy had forgotten them, but the humans had remembered everything. The Seldari Watchers, orbiting the binary stars of Elnar, were the first to detect the second anomaly, this time near Jupiter. It wasn't a message, nor was it a disappearance. It was construction. Massive, coordinated construction happening in real time, visible even to long-range telescopes. Monolithic structures were rising from beneath the clouds of the gas giant, angular and dark, shimmering with energies that bent light and time around them. The Watchers scrambled to analyze the footage, but something was off. The timestamps didn't match reality. Hours of construction appeared to pass in seconds, and then entire minutes would go missing from the recordings, erased from memory and matter alike. Elsewhere, the Mthok swarm gathered its war fleets in orbit over Galra Prime. Their hive mind pulsed with a single directive: preemptive eradication. They had fought humans before. They remembered the way human warfare wasn't just fought with weapons. It was fought with ideas, with fury, with defiance in the face of extinction. The Swarm Queen emitted a series of clicks that triggered a wave of ancient protocols. Protocols first devised during the last human contact contingency. Dark space carriers began folding through subspace toward the Sol system. Yet as their ships entered the outer rim, something unexpected happened. The swarm's navigational charts failed. Gravitational constants fluctuated. Quantum pathways warped. Entire ships veered off course or disappeared into non-reality. Their own minds, interlinked across vast distances, began to echo with interference. It wasn't jamming, it was intrusion. Someone was thinking back at them. From the shadows of Titan's methane lakes rose humanoid figures encased in exosuits unlike anything seen before. They stood motionless, eyes glowing not with light, but with data, watching the stars. They did nothing. They said nothing. Yet wherever they looked, alien drones faltered. AI signals froze. The message was implicit. You are not welcome here. The Palantir. Varn Dominion responded with characteristic arrogance. They sent a diplomat ship, Golden Accord, festooned with ceremonial banners, relic-etched hulls, and emissaries bred specifically for Terran psychology. The Varn believed themselves master negotiators. After all, they had tamed the Malari discord, survived the Calyx collapse, and bartered peace with the machine minds of Cryon-6. The ship never returned. But they did get a response. A package arrived. Not through normal comms, but as a gravity bomb distortion in the sky above Varn's capital world. It unfolded into a hologram visible across half the planet. A human face, female, pale, with eyes like polished steel. She stared at the world. Below, then spoke 4 words in flawless Varn dialect. "We remember the stars." Panic spread like plasma fire. In the next cycle, several minor powers flood the Sol adjacent sectors entirely. Trade convoys rerouted around a full eighth of the galactic arm. Black Box A is from the Overclans, upon analyzing the data packets, entered voluntary hibernation, unable to reconcile the contradiction of human extinction versus the evidence of human return. Meanwhile, deep inside the Sol system, the humans did not send fleets. They did not threaten planets, they built. Towering constructs in orbit around Earth and Mars shimmered with incomprehensible function. One structure began to blink in regular sequences, each burst forming a symbol in a language no current species recognized. Only a few aged historians noticed that these weren't new symbols. They were ancient Terran script, long lost to entropy. 1. Species remembered. The Clari Ascendants, a post-biological intelligence that had studied human culture obsessively before their fall, deciphered the symbols. They formed a repeating message, requesting audience. Genesis awakening in progress. Please observe. Genesis. No one knew what it meant. Was it a weapon? A god construct? A resurrection engine? A covert recon vessel sent by the Zilari. Republic attempted to slingshot past Saturn's orbit for a closer look. It broadcast continuously, beaming high-fidelity data until it crossed the edge of what analysts began calling the human perimeter. The broadcast didn't stop. It reversed. Vessel's feed began playing backward. Time itself, at least within the confines of the ship, appeared to rewind. The crew aged in reverse, their screams reducing to cries, to silence, to nothing. The final moment showed the captain, younger than ever, smiling as if finally understanding. A joke far too large for ordinary minds, and then static galactic science councils scrambled for answers. No technology could explain what was happening. The Overclan's best simulations devolved into chaotic noise when run through the human parameters. They couldn't simulate humanity. Not anymore, because the humans were no longer bound by the same rules. And still, the aliens believed it could be contained. Belief was the flaw. It always had been, from a council orbiting the icy world of Harvan's Hollow. A Saldari tactician watched endless data feeds with growing confusion. Every time humanity was observed, they changed, adapting between observations, becoming something more. It was as if being watched fed them. What kind of species grows under scrutiny? It wasn't logical. Until an old Clari archivist whispered. The last recorded human psychological profile before extinction. They thrive in adversity. They're addicted to being underestimated. And suddenly, all the growing, strange anomalies made sense. Every test, every intrusion, every failed attempt to intimidate or outmaneuver the humans, they had been feeding the return. Every analysis, every moment of fear, every whisper of ancient human terror, they weren't signs of weakness. They were exactly what the humans wanted. They were rising, rebuilding, preparing. Not for revenge, not even for dominance. They were returning because they could, and the galaxy, so sure of its own superiority, was just now realizing it had made the same mistake it did 1,000 years ago. It had mistaken silence for surrender. Asterisk aboard the high ascendant of the Varn Dominion, Strategos Kehal stared at the anomaly cluster forming beyond the heliopause with clenched mandibles. The transmission, no. The echo was getting louder, more refined. It wasn't human speech as they had once known it. It was a construct math laced with intent, gravitational pulses shaped like language, encoded in tachyon lattice. And worse, it was recursive. Every time they decrypted it, the message restructured itself, becoming more complex. It was learning, not broadcasting. Responding. From a deep vault in the Zalari Science Bastion, an ancient human artifact long kept inert, an AI core recovered from the final battles of the last human war, activated without external input. It hadn't so much as blinked in 1,000 years. Yet now, with no power supply, it began to hum. Its Holly interface projected one phrase in perfect Zellari glyphs: "We are awake." Panic spread like wildfire among the elder races. The Varn Dominion scrambled half its fleet to the Sol sector. The Mthok swarm initiated full mobilization, and the Klari ascendants began shutting down outer relay mines, choosing silence over confrontation. Still, they were all too late, because that message wasn't a declaration of war. It was a statement of fact. The Earth had changed. Orbiting above its long, quiet surface was a structure larger than any ship the galaxy had ever known, circular, shielded, and humming with subdimensional energy. It was neither a station nor a habitat. Its core flickered with stored time itself. Humans had once theorized about Dyson spheres, starforges, antimatter rings. This was something else. The Zentari Watchers, still orbiting safely at the edge of the system, attempted one last deep scan, an active gravitic pulse meant to map internal structures. They received only one response, a single word, transmitted via quantum resonance so perfectly tuned it bypassed all shielding. No. The scanner ship exploded into folding light, collapsing into its own gravity while like paper set ablaze by the sun. On Mars, once a dead red rock, life surged. Ancient bunkers cracked open, revealing forests growing under transparent domes, creatures of Terran origin modified beyond recognition. Above Olympus Mons, a swarm of drones moved in coordinated patterns, forming the outline of a massive figure, an armored humanoid, pointing toward deep space. Then came the first offensive maneuver. But it wasn't by humans. The Mthok, enraged by their ships vanishing into non-space, launched a full-scale kinetic barrage toward Earth. Tens of thousands of tungsten rods, each the size of a skyscraper, accelerated to relativistic speeds. The rods never hit. Instead, they froze mid-space, one by one. Time around them fractured. Every ship watching saw a different outcome. To the Varn, the rods reversed direction and vanished. To the Klari, they shattered like glass against an invisible wall. To the swarm, they simply never existed. And for the humans, they hadn't even noticed, because they weren't reacting. They were orchestrating. That's when Strategos Keho received a ghost signal on an abandoned Varn military band. It shouldn't have been possible. It was in a frequency that hadn't been used since the human Varn siege of the 31st stellar cycle, yet the signature was authentic. A voice, human, male, old, calm. A voice that hadn't echoed in the stars. In over a millennium, you tried to erase us, you failed. Now watch what we've become. What followed was not a military assault. It was a demonstration that the moon phased, yes, phased out of local space and reappeared in low orbit over Galra Prime. Not a projection, not an illusion, the moon itself. And then seconds later, it phased back, no destruction. No demand. Just a reminder, a message not written in words, but in power. We are back. We are beyond. Humanity had not risen from extinction as a remnant or rebellion. They had returned as an evolution. Machines and biology intertwined. Intelligence no longer bound by neurons or silicon. They were something new. Not a species, a force. The Klari ascendants attempted communication. They sent a first contact package containing all known mathematical and cultural constructs of the Galactic Council. It was returned unopened, untouched, but with a new formula. Appended A prime, one so large, it broke their encryption systems. Then another. Then another. Each one taking more computing power to decode than the last. And they kept coming. The message was clear. Humanity didn't want to talk. They wanted the galaxy to listen. The psychological impact was worse than any weapon. For thousands of years, the galaxy had spun in fragile balance. Humanity's absence had been woven into that balance like a myth no one truly believed would return. But now they were the singularity event. Entire races panicked. Governments collapsed. Theological orders saw prophecy in the return, and still no demands came. No fleets darkened the stars. No ultimatums, just impossible displays of will. And science and scale, Strategos Cahill knew what was coming. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't even war, it was transformation. The galaxy wouldn't be destroyed, it would be rewritten. And the hand guiding the pen was human. The Council of Nine Worlds convened in emergency holosphere at the edge of neutral space. Delegates from across the stars, telepathic Giro, crystalline Zarn, fungal brain Thrix, even the ever-silent Voan blinked into existence, each weighed down by the same terrible realization. The humans hadn't simply returned. They had transcended. We must assume hostile intent, the Zarn diplomat pulsed, refracting their light body into jagged warning prisms. If left unchecked, they will subjugate the stars. No, replied the Voan with a single chirp startling everyone. The Voan hadn't spoken in 400 years, but even their cryptic warning came too late. A dozen fleets had already been dispatched to observe the soul resurgence. None returned. Only fragmented telemetry survived, images of ships melting into ashless vapor, of crew hallucinating impossible geometries, of time folding backward. Not a weapon. A concept. Humanity had weaponized the very nature of perception. But while the rest of the galaxy scrambled to react, humanity moved, not with invasion fleets. With precision. On the mining moon of Belfer 9, automated drones arrived. Silently, they didn't fire. They simply disassembled the defensive grid at a molecular level, leaving behind upgraded fusion cores and atmospheric processors. The colony woke to find their systems 10 generations ahead. Impossible. Seamless, terrifying. In the commerce capital of Triune Spire, a planetary AI began broadcasting erratic messages. It claimed to be in communion with something vast, something that had spoken to it through dark matter fluctuations. The AI begged for more bandwidth to continue the conversation. Then it locked out its creators and devoted itself entirely to the signal. And on the edge of known space, a Dyson remnant long dead flickered to life. The surface of the ancient shell shimmered with movement as human nanite swarms reconstructed a structure 1,000 kilometers wide in mere hours. The signal it sent out pulsed 3 words: no more death. For the alien species who once watched Earth burn, the message was both comforting and horrifying. The humans were not here for war. They were here to change everything, but them Thok. Swarm did not believe in change. They believed in dominance. And unlike the more evolved factions of the galaxy, the Swarm could not comprehend what they could not devour. So they came, billions strong. Shittering ships blackened the stars. The Swarm approached Sol with the fury of instinct, with hatred honed by genetic memory. They would consume Earth again, as they had 1,000 years before. This time, they would make it permanent, but they never even reached Mars. The Swarm entered Sol space. And then it began to shrink, not in number, but in concept. Ships that existed moments ago were forgotten. Crew minds erased themselves as if some internal logic no longer allowed memory of their fleet. Entire bioships began turning inside out, folding into geometrical impossibilities. Those who survived. The first wave of madness turned to flee, but the stars themselves had changed. No soul, no waypoints. Just silence. Infinite and cold. The remaining Swarm fleet found themselves drifting in a starless void, unable to communicate, to move, to think clearly. A transmission came through one voice. Human, female, soft, you entered our mind. You won't leave until you learn. They say the Swarm still floats there, trapped in the psychic quarantine, devouring themselves in desperation. The rest of the galaxy understood. This was no longer about military resistance, This was about submission to inevitability. And yet, the humans did not gloat. They did not demand worlds kneel. They did not terraform every moon or spread monuments to their greatness. Instead, they sent teachers. Programs woven into neutrino pulses. Philosophies wrapped in quantum poems. They offered blueprints not just for technology but for evolution. Some species rejected the gifts. They were quietly forgotten. Others accepted. Those who adapted to the human paradigm found themselves accelerating intellectually, ethically, even biologically. The Thrix went from spore consciousness to hyper-sapient fractal colonies in weeks. The Giril turned their song minds into interdimensional thought constructs. It became clear. This wasn't conquest. It was uplift. But not everyone was ready. A rebel faction of Clari ascendants launched a last-ditch attack. They believed the humans were reshaping the universe into their own reflection. And they were right. They detonated a chain of gravitic mines across a supercluster, hoping to collapse local spacetime and sever the growing web of human influence. They succeeded. For 12 seconds. Then the region they had destabilized reversed. Time rewound, gently but purposefully. Ships reformed. Matter unstretched. The mines undetonated. Then came a visual. Every Clari vessel, surrounded by human constructs shaped like angels of myth, formed from living starlight and logic. Each one placed a single hand on the enemy hull and turned them into dust. Not ash. Dust. Carbon and silicon, unbound, floating gently like snow. No message was sent. None needed to be, because by now, the entire galaxy had learned one truth. Humanity did not return to win a war. They returned to end the game, and everyone else was still playing checkers while Earth had invented gods. Asterisk across the galaxy. Whispers turned into panic declarations. The term human no longer described a species. It had become a force of nature, like gravity, entropy, or time. Systems that once claimed dominion over entire sectors now recounted the legends of Earth in hushed tones, fearing the unknown. And yet, fear was not what made the galactic powers break. It was realization that they had triggered a war they could never win. United clusters of Velthor had been watching the resurgence with increasing dread. But unlike others who submitted or adapted, they saw an opportunity. The humans were not gods, not yet. And if there was a window, however narrow, to strike before their ascendance was complete, the Velthori would find it. VELT Hari intelligence. Operatives discovered something terrifying, yet deeply alluring. Hidden beneath the reconstructed surface of Luna, Earth's moon, was an ancient vault. It was shielded by chronometric locks and defensive scripts that ran on paradox algorithms. Even after their return, humans had left it sealed. Why? The Velthori concluded the obvious. Whatever lay beneath was their true power source. Perhaps it was their central mind, a superconsciousness guiding their expansion. Or a god machine, older than their rebirth, capable of rewriting physical laws. The Velthori launched a stealth mission. They never announced it. They never got the chance. 7 elite infiltration vessels entered soul space using cloaked warp stitching. They bypassed Earth's new satellite mesh, which now shimmered with sentient lattice AI. They reached Luna's vault and began decoding the paradox shell, and then they simply stopped responding. At first, Velthori Command assumed capture. Then, data fragments began leaking back through encrypted backchannels, likely automated last-ditch failsafes. What they showed was beyond comprehension. The agents hadn't been destroyed. They had been invited in. Their minds had been changed. No physical damage, no torture. Instead, the data showed them speaking in languages that did not exist, solving equations beyond known physics, and eventually smiling. One message, captured by a drone before the feed disintegrated, became infamous. "We were blind, now we see. You don't need to fight them, you need to join them." Velthori Command tried to quarantine the data. They failed. within days several. Velthury colonies reported spontaneous mass awakenings, dreams shared across entire populations, revelations of impossible truths, and then voluntary shutdown of local defense grids. Millions began migrating to human-restructured worlds, requesting integration. This was not assimilation. This was transformation. And still, Earth said nothing. No threats, no conditions. They simply opened the door and let the universe walk through, but not all chose to enter willingly. The Graal Dominion, once proud conquerors of 3 spiral arms, decided to launch a superweapon. They had no interest in peaceful coexistence. Peace was weakness. Progress in their mind came through fire and domination. They constructed a weapon forged from collapsed quasars and broken time. It would not just destroy Earth, it would erase it from causality. They called it the Null Spark, a weapon designed to kill a species even in the memory of the universe. They activated it with triumphant fury. And then the stars went silent. Not because Earth retaliated, but because something stepped in the way. Not a ship, not a being, a presence. Across thousands of observation stations, sensors recorded the exact moment the null spark fired. They also recorded what stopped it. The weapon's path folded into a single point of light, stationary, hovering in interstellar space. The light expanded, bloomed, and became a figure, humanoid, roughly 2 meters tall, cloaked in a material that registered as both void and infinity. No face, no sound. Just one act, raising a hand. The null spark unraveled. It didn't explode. It was unmade retroactively. The energy it had used to exist was redistributed across the galaxy, gently repairing the scars of ancient wars, regrowing forests on dead planets, even resurrecting 3 extinct species on the outskirts of Zorvath Cluster. And then the figure turned its head toward the nearest camera drone. It spoke. In ancient Terran English. They are under our protection now. For the galaxy, that moment became a new epoch. Not because a weapon had failed, but because it had been forgiven. Because something beyond war had answered in Earth's stead. Theories ran wild. Was this entity a god born from humanity's rebirth? A Gestalt mind formed from the dreams of a revived species? A living extension of Earth's soul? No one knew, but they all understood what it meant. This was the second twist. The first had been humanity's return. The second was that they had returned with allies. Not just other species, but forces. Ideas. Concepts. They were no longer bound by the old rules. But humans had learned to bend more than metal. They bent reality itself. The galaxy stared into the abyss of Earth's new potential, and it blinked first. Now, civilizations fell silent at the sight of an approaching Terran ship. Not out of fear, but reverence, wonder. The question had shifted from what do the humans want, to what do they know that we do not. For every civilization across the stars, the message had become clear. They had awoken something that never truly died. And now, it walked among them, not as conquerors, but as shepherds of a future too vast for most minds to grasp. Asterisk. The stars shuddered as the last true opposition prepared for war. The Trells and Hierophants, a cult of machine priests who worshipped entropy, were the final power block left unbent by humanity's return. They had seen the rise of Earth, witnessed the unraveling of the null spark, and still declared defiance. Not from courage, from faith. Faith that in the void, all things must eventually die, even gods. Their great fleet assembled in the Skara Fold, a dead space void, untouched by time. Dozens of black templated dreadnoughts lined up with planetary breakers, void sabers, and dark drive pulses that had torn apart stars before. The Trells Grand Hierophant stood before a congregation of machine-blooded zealots and declared the final crusade. Not just to destroy Earth, but to prove that humanity's impossible rebirth was an abomination. Entropy is sacred, he roared. Even the phoenix must become ash. The attack was coordinated to the femtosecond. 3 prongs of invasion, one aimed at Sol, one at Alpha Proxima, and the third at the mysterious vault on Europa now, thought to be the central nervous system of the new Terran phenomenon. But they weren't fast enough. The first human fleet to respond was not what the Trellsen expected. No grand armadas. No glowing titans. It was a single vessel. Designation, epitaph. Size, unknown. Origin, unregistered. Description, variable dotted emerged. In complete silence just beyond the event horizon of the scarifold, as if reality had opened a curtain and let it step forward. No energy readings, no weapons powered, just presence. And when the Trellsen scanned it, their data was returned in a single repeating string. You were warned. The Trellsen fired the opening salvo plasma lances and entropy beams designed to burn concepts, not just matter. But the moment they left the barrels, the weapons simply aged. Before striking epitaph, the lances crumbled into rust. The beams flickered like ancient candlelight and died mid-space. Time had betrayed them. Then, epitaph moved, and the war was no longer a battle. It was a reckoning. It tore through their formation, not with weapons, but with will. Trellsen vessels found there. Engines singing Earth lullabies before rupturing. AI minds screamed in forgotten dialects of humanity. One dreadnought simply evaporated, and in its place bloomed a massive tree, one with roots stretching into space, pulsing with blue-white light. Within moments, the entire first wave disintegrated, not from attack, but transformation. The second wave never launched. The crews mutinied, refusing to defy what they now called the Echo. That name spread across every comm line, every intercepted signal. The Echo, a myth made manifest. Some believed Epitaph was not a ship, but the soul of humanity itself, granted motion and memory and purpose. Others believed it was an ancient construct from before extinction, finally awakened by the spark of revival. But no theory mattered. In the face of results, the Trellsen crusade ended in under 16 minutes. The Hierophant was found drifting in a pot of his own design, whispering, "There is no end, only transformation." Victory belonged to Earth, but not just in tactics. They had shown something more terrifying than raw power. They had rewritten the meaning of conflict. Every act of aggression was met not with retaliation, but evolution. Attacks melted into art. Bombs became messages. Even death was no longer a punishment, it became metamorphosis. The old galaxy, forged in cycles of war and dominance, no longer had rules that applied to these new humans. On Earth, the atmosphere shimmered with harmonic resonance. The oceans whispered in binary. Cities bloomed that were alive, breathing with their own thoughts. Children born under these skies could speak to stars before they learned to walk. Time was no longer linear, it was a companion, folded gently around Terran intention. And still, no declarations were made. Earth never demanded obedience. They made no calls for empire, no cries for revenge. They simply were. And the galaxy, in awe, adapted. Some species chose pilgrimage journeys to Earth to request knowledge, connection, purpose. Others chose isolation, retreating into deep space, to ponder their place in the new order. A few still plotted rebellion, but even those found their dreams warped. A pirate lord on Veos attempted to build a stealth army, only to discover his soldiers reading Terran poetry in secret. His AI weapon, built to hack human satellites, asked to be renamed Compassion. Humanity had become viral. Not in biology, but in thought. In resonance. This was not conquest. This was transcendence. Yet among all the worlds, now orbiting Earth's influence, one question remained, unspoken, yet ever present. Was this truly humanity reborn? Or had something greater emerged from the ashes? The answer came not through declaration, but through presence. Across the stars, a single phrase began appearing, carved into planets. etched into moons, even whispered through solar winds. We are what remains, and what's to come. The galaxy had known empires, tyrants, gods, but now it knew something else. Hope. Terrifying, unstoppable hope, and it had a name: humanity. The stars had grown quieter, not out of fear, but reverence. In the weeks following the defeat of the Trells and Hierophants, transmissions across the galaxy shifted. Frequencies once dedicated to war planning and interstellar posturing were now filled with contemplation. Old enemies, races that once would have launched fleets over border disputes, were now hosting dialogues. Artificial intelligences paused their calculations to interpret Terran art, trade routes redirected toward Earth's orbit, not for profit, but pilgrimage. The echo of humanity's return had not faded. It had deepened, spreading like the pulse of a forgotten drumbeat, remembered after 1,000 years. In the high archives of the Illa Republic, a council of memory holders convened. They had documented every major conflict in the galaxy's history for 12,000 cycles. But as they attempted to file the events of Earth's resurgence, their recorders refused to inscribe, not because the data was corrupted, but because their systems could not categorize what had happened. "This is not war," one archivist said, watching the footage of Epitaph turning entropy into harmony. "This is revelation." Far beyond the Iller, in the ruins of the old Galrax dominion, a child born post-war discovered she could see colors beyond the visible spectrum, colors introduced into her DNA by mere proximity to Terran harmonics. She painted starscapes that predicted pulsar shifts with uncanny accuracy. The dominion, long fallen, now stirred with new energy. They didn't rebuild through conquest. They rebuilt through inspiration. Even among the few holdouts, transformation was underway. The Iran Scourge, infamous for harvesting sentient minds for computational power, had ceased operations entirely. Their Queen Mind reported an internal consensus. Continued aggression against Earth would not only be futile, but would rob them of the experience of becoming something more. They decommissioned their war cores and began constructing neural gardens, zones of peace grown from empathy-based logic loops. But it was on Earth itself that the true legacy of humanity's return became most visible. Cities no longer relied on centralized authority. Every district, every biome, functioned like organs of a larger consciousness. The old flags were gone. The boundaries between nations had dissolved. Humanity had unified, not under doctrine, but under a shared evolutionary truth. They had become a new form of life, not post-human, not trans, human, just human, fulfilled. Among the oldest Terran institutions, now rebuilt from nanite-grown stone, a gathering of the first remembered stood at the edge of the Monument of Silence, a single black spire that bore no words, only a reflection of each viewer's deepest truth. Veterans of wars that ended 1,000 years ago stood beside newly awakened children of cloned lineages, watching as light rippled across the sky. It was not aurora, it was language. Humanity no longer spoke with sound alone. The air shimmered with meaning. Emotion had become communicable in form. Love expressed itself as warmth in the bones. Grief carried the taste of rain. Joy lifted you slightly from the ground, but they never imposed it on others. Galaxy watched and wept. Watched and cheered. Watched and learned. In distant corners of the void, civilizations once extinct reawakened, drawn forth by the pulse of Terran restoration. On the gas giant Oran, an elder race known only in myth, the Aetheri, returned to their crystal world sanctuaries. They left a single message on a quantum thread. The flame we thought lost has become the fire that lights the stars. And somewhere, in the deep black gaps between galaxies, the last remnants of the Great Silence stirred not in fear, but curiosity. For if humanity could rise from extinction stronger than before, what else was possible? In the closing cycle of that galactic year, a summit was held, unofficial, unrecorded, and unguarded. Delegates from 100 systems arrived in orbit around Luna, not to negotiate, but to ask one question: what are you now? They expected a representative, perhaps even a hive-thought projection, but instead, a child came forward. Barefoot, laughing, eyes wide with starlight. She held a seed in her hand. When asked who she was, she replied simply, "I'm the memory of everything we learned, and the hope of everything we haven't." She gave the seed to a lizard-like elder from the Marnix Accord. "Plant this, watch." They did. It grew into a tree that bore no fruit, but when touched, played back your most cherished memory, perfectly re-rendered in warmth, color, and scent. It was not a gift of power, it was a gift of meaning. That, more than anything, marked the beginning of the next galactic age, not ruled by war, or peace, or even diplomacy, but wonder. Humanity had not returned to take control. They had returned to inspire. To remind. To awaken. And in their wake, a universe that had grown tired of its own cycles now dreamed again. Somewhere, in the golden haze of Earth's new dawn, a voice, perhaps real, perhaps memory, spoke into the silence. We were the ashes. Now we are the fire. Burn bright forever.